Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the Apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. I'm your MC Rich, and I'm joined by my co-MC Rach Shelke. How are you doing, Rach?
I'm doing great. I'm super excited for what we're going to reveal tonight.
I know, me too. This is season 3 of the show. In season 2, Rach created our topic episodes, and we had a blast digging through and talking about genre, about MCing, comparing and contrasting the different games in the PbtA family. And now, in season 3, we're adding a third leg to the stool, as it were, and we're calling it Movie Night. Movie Night is inspired by an older podcast that since pod faded, then come back but evolved. The original flavor was a show called Sharkbone, a show by Devin Kelly, Jarvis Mishler, and occasional guests. And in Sharkbone, each episode they talked about a movie and then discussed mechanics inspired by the movie for a variety of games. So here's the Plus One Forward spin on it. In Movie Night, we're going to talk about a movie and a PbtA game as a pairing, like, white wine and a particular pasta or, something like that. We're going to watch the movie to get inspired for the game. And we are super excited for this new show. We, of course, want your feedback on it, so make sure that you tweet at us with your thoughts.
And where can they tweet at us at?
At Plus One Forward on Twitter. Or, of course, Rach, you are...
I am Ted Dog, so that's TEDDOG on Twitter.
And I'm ORKLORD. But, of course, we always check the Plus One Forward Twitter if that's easier to remember.
But we definitely want to hear about your favorite combinations of games and movies. Maybe you even discovered a new favorite movie because it was listed in a Powered by the Apocalypse game.
This episode, we're talking about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse paired with Masks: A New Generation.
I am so excited to talk about this movie. This movie lit my mind on fire.
Me too. I went to see it a second time in 3D just to prep for this.
One of the ideas behind these movie night episodes is to explore films mentioned in the inspiration and mediography sections of Powered by the Apocalypse games. This gives us the opportunity to explore the designer's inspirations and see what we as players and MCs can take from that inspiration to apply to our own games. While mediographies can include any piece of media you can imagine, such as music, books, even other games, we're focusing on movies. They're relatively small time commitments that you can easily follow along with at home. Masks is an interesting place to start because a lot of media featuring teenage superheroes tends to be serialized longer works. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse isn't mentioned in the Masks core book. Honestly, though, I think that's because the movie only came out in late 2018.
Yeah, I'm sure that Masks 2nd edition will list it, though. I mean, it has to.
Right? It's one of the best movie examples I can think of for teenage superheroes right now.
Absolutely.
Before we go any further, we should take a moment to assure any listeners that there will be a clear spoiler break in these movie night episodes. We're going to introduce the film and maybe discuss some details touched upon in the trailer, and introduce the game as spoiler-free as possible, then clearly tell you when we're going to be discussing these movies in depth. We'll also mark that time on the show notes if you want to jump back in after watching the movie and want to get right into the meat of the episode.
Right. Now let me break down how we are structuring the movie night episodes. First, we'll talk about a summary of the movie's plot and major characters. That will be spoiler-free. Next, we'll talk about a summary of the PbtA game that we are pairing it with. Of course, that'll be spoilerific. Then we'll talk about what playbooks, if any, we see in the movie and how they were best embodied. And then last, we'll talk about the movie, what scenes in that movie could have easily been played at the table with that paired game and how. So let's start off with a summary of the movie. Rach, take us away.
All right. Miles Morales is a young man living in Brooklyn and dealing with, teenager problems. His parents expect great things from him, but they don't seem to understand or connect with him. Miles' relationship with his father, Jefferson Davis, is particularly strained. While there's no question Jefferson loves his son, the two of them seem to be drifting apart.
I just want to jump in to say, it wasn't until you wrote this summary that I realized that Miles took his mother's name, and I think that's awesome.
Right? She's really cool, even though I don't mention her in the summary, but I have a soft spot for healthcare professionals in films.
Okay, sorry for the interruption. Go right ahead with summarizing.
Miles was recently transferred from a public school to Visions Academy, a private boarding school. He can't seem to fit in there with the other students. Even his attempts at failing out of the prestigious school aren't going so well. One of the bright spots in Miles' life is his relationship with his uncle Aaron. Aaron has grown into a second father figure, encouraging Miles to explore himself through art and relationships, to get a better sense of the person he is and wants to become. Oh, but wait, this is a Spider-Man film, right? Miles is bit by a radioactive spider, and soon discovers he has similar powers to the hero Spider-Man. Before he can start training properly, Miles is tossed into a conflict that crosses his universe over with several others and threatens to destroy all of them. Joining Miles on his mission to save the multiverse are Peter B. Parker, a middle-aged Spider-Man who has been a hero for over 2 decades, Gwen Stacy, another young spider hero trying to balance being a superhero and being a teenager, Penny Parker, a plucky girl who pilots a mecha with a radioactive spider, Spider-Man Noir, an alternate Peter Parker from the 1930s, and Peter Porker, a spider who was bit by a radioactive pig and thus gained superpowers.
I can't hear that without laughing.
Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was released into theaters in December of 2018. Accessing this movie is admittedly going to depend on when you listen to this episode and where you live. As of this recording in January 2019, the film was still running in first-run theaters. Given that it just won the Golden Globe for Best Animated Feature Film and is still in the top 3 for box office returns, I expect that it will still be in theaters for a few more weeks.
While pre-orders for digital download and Blu-ray don't have a date listed at this time, most movies are released that way about 90 days after the movie has been released to theaters, so March-ish?
If you have access, time, and money to commit to a screening, I would highly recommend seeing this film in theaters. It's a stunning movie that benefits from the scale a movie theater can provide and a great sound system.
As a person who saw it in 2D and then again in 3D, I'll say you don't need to see it in 3D. There was very little that the 3D version added. Some visuals popped a little more, but that's about all I noticed personally. It wasn't worth the extra cash. The movie, however, in 2D is still super gorgeous.
Both times I saw it, it was in 3D. This was admittedly me paying a little bit extra for the convenience because those times worked out best. I'm interested in seeing it even a third time in theaters in 2D, just to see how the more comic booky aesthetic elements translate to the 2D film, given that comic books are a 2D medium. Now that we've introduced our film, Rich, why don't you spoil all the juicy details of Masks for us?
All right. Masks: A New Generation is a Powered by the Apocalypse game that was originally published in 2016 as a result of a successful Kickstarter campaign. It's published by Magpie Games, and the game's creator is Brendan Conway. The goal of Masks is to create stories with teams of young superheroes who fight big villains, save folks, and try to figure out who the heck they are and what kind of grown-up they want to be.
There's some people who compare Masks to Monster Hearts, citing that they're both PbtA games that discuss coming-of-age themes. However, both games explore these themes in very different ways and mechanics.
Yeah. The game mechanics of Masks feature moves that allow other players and the GM, because there's no MC in Masks, to shift your character's stats. Instead of a harm track or hit points, your character will be hit with conditions. And these conditions make it harder to pull off a few of the basic moves. But take heart. When you fail a roll in Masks, you get XP, which in this game is called potential.
Can I pop in here to call out that the term potential is such a wonderful spin on the word experience, especially when you're dealing with teenagers? I think it cuts right to what the game is about.
Absolutely. It's a really clever change. Sometimes I feel weird when experience points have different names, but that one is just so apt. Another aspect of Masks is that it has a built-in setting, which is a rarity for RPGs using the Apocalypse engine, which we discuss more fully in the PbtA and Settings episode of Plus One Forward. Halcyon City is the built-in setting. It doesn't have a map, sadly, but it has a host of villains and heroes as well as several generations of superpowered folks. To empower the playgroup and emulate rollicking team-up fights, Masks has team moves and a resource called the Team Pool that any player can tap into to aid another PC as long as it makes sense in the scene. Magpie has also released several supplements for Masks, with setting info and new playbooks, all to expand the reach of the game into different comics genres and explore different kinds of heroes. All of the books feature vibrant, colorful art of comic book style characters in action poses, lots of different styles and shapes of people, which is really welcoming. The Masks playbooks cover nearly any young hero you can imagine, with moves that are quotes from or inspired by those heroes. And that is Masks: A New Generation, which we are pairing with Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse.
This is the point in this movie night episode where we'll be shifting from spoiler-free discussion to freely spoiling our movie for today. We'll give you a second to pause if you want. Come back and join us once you've seen the movie and you're ready to continue.
All right. Rach, what playbooks, if any, do we see in the movie, and how were they best embodied?
Let's start at the beginning one last time. Yeah, I was looking through the whole episode for a space to fit that in. Not gonna lie, after watching this movie, my first thought was, so how can I start playing these characters right now?
Heck yes.
In my opinion, not all of the spider heroes are directly playable, and that's okay. Obviously, it would be hard to play Peter B. Parker, that being our midlife crisis Spider-Man, in a game with teenage heroes. For playbook discussion, I think we need to limit our focus to Miles, Gwen, and Penny.
Yeah, those are the young adults, I agree.
Now, not every one of our suggestions is going to be a complete fit for these characters. Consider these playbook suggestions to be a starting point for capturing the spirit of the character. Maybe you're inspired by Miles and want to play a character that's a little bit like him. Obviously, your character arc in game is not going to follow plot beat for plot beat the movie, but you can ground yourself in elements of the character and then explore it on your own.
All right, Rach, with that out of the way, who is the first? Do you want to start off with Miles?
Yeah, let's start off with Miles, the main character. I think there's a good argument to be made that Miles is the legacy playbook. His plot arc in the movie is about gaining the mantle of Spider-Man, then working through his insecurities and trauma as he tries to figure out what the Spider-Man mantle means and who he is as a person. Playbook moves that parallel events in the film include Never Give Up, Never Surrender and Words of the Past. Words of the Past reflects the relationship that Miles has with the other spiders, but in particular, Peter B. Parker. Miles really wants to learn this superhero thing, and Peter answers Miles's questions honestly. But they aren't always the answers Miles wants to hear, of course.
Nope.
As for Never Give Up, Never Surrender, you can see this in action with the final fight with Kingpin. Miles is more focused on acting defensively than offensively in this fight, probably because he knows Fisk is a lethal threat. For the actual legacy part of the playbook, that being the section where the player builds the character's network of NPCs, you might need to think a little bit out of the box. Miles is the only living Spider-Man in his universe, but other members of that network exist, just in different universes.
You know, the thing is, Rach, the Janice playbook is the Spider-Man playbook. Okay, maybe you have a point with the legacy thing, but the Janice is the Spider-Man playbook.
Aha, but Gwen is the Janice. I have very strong feelings about this.
Okay, do share.
Let's take a moment to look at Gwen Stacy. If the Janice is the Spider-Man playbook, and arguably Gwen's background is the closest to a traditional Spider-Man origin, therefore Gwen is the Janice. I think, though, Gwen presents a different way of looking at the Janice. Gwen has broken her personality into two parts, much in the same way the Janice has. We have Spider-Woman, the cool, badass hero. There's also Gwen Stacy, who is grieving for the loss of her best friend and not quite ready to move past that tragedy. Because the film doesn't take place in Gwen's home universe and doesn't dwell a lot in Gwen's mental space, we don't get to see how the balance she's created causes conflict in her daily life. Gwen is usually affirming her heroic identity in Miles' universe, although it should be noted that she's introduced to the audience as a student at Vision's Academy before we get that connection to Spider-Woman later on. In fact, Gwen is the only hero in the movie to get a reveal of that.
Yeah. The part where she gives Miles a fake name is such a great gag. It's unfortunate it's overshadowed by Miles' stumbling and bumbling, but watching her work her way to the fake name of Gwanda was just hilarious.
It's a fantastic scene. There's a few moments like that where you can make an argument that Gwen's civilian life is being affirmed. In Masks, this would be done through the move The Mask. The best example I can think of this in action is during the fundraiser gala at Fisk Tower. Our heroes are trying to sneak in when midlife crisis Peter, that being Peter B. Parker, encounters this world's Mary Jane and promptly locks up and starts having a bit of a breakdown. He's still grieving his divorce from his MJ, and this encounter rips open those emotional wounds. Gwen steps in, and we have a sudden shift when Gwen starts acting more mundane, explaining to Peter she's experienced similar emotions since coming here. As the audience, we know she's referring to Peter B. Parker being the grown-up, middle-aged version of her best friend she couldn't save. Playbook moves that parallel other events in the film include mild-mannered and game-face. We can see mild-mannered in the ways Gwen pretends to be a normal student at Miles' school. Game-face embodies how Gwen deals with her trauma, burying herself in superhero work and closing off her emotions.
Oh, man, you've nailed it. Gwen is definitely the Janice. Good work.
Thank you.
Now we need to talk about Penny.
I think Penny Parker is pretty adorable, but we don't see that much of her. She enters the story relatively late, when we're juggling 6 spider heroes on screen.
Mm-hmm.
The motif of little girl, big robot, which Penny embodies, could be explored using the Brain playbook, as it's the most tech-centric of the playbooks.
It is, but the Brain also points out flaws in plans, creates crazy solutions, and hides from one of their own experiments gone wrong. I'm not entirely sure that Penny in this movie fits that playbook.
The Brain could be a future Penny, using the movie version as a seed of a character idea. That said, how would you play movie Penny, Rich?
Could she be Beacon? I'll give a hat tip to Morgan Ellis for this one. Penny doesn't have special powers, other than her psychic link to a robotic spider, plus skills at super hacking, coding, and fabrication of goobers. She's such a joy to watch, and she's very much into superheroing. She obviously has a pet, her mechanical spider mech, which is, come on, Lucky. Okay, I know that's a stretch. That's mostly to cover regular pet animals, but there have been some other magical creatures that have been pets of the things that inspired the Beacon. I definitely saw Sucket Domitian when she faced Scorpion. That's one of the Beacon moves. We honestly don't get to see Penny's desires or her drives. We don't get to see her grow and change, except in the end with her reaction to losing Spider, her mech, which was a heartbreaker. And then we get to see Spider-Man Noir comfort her before she continues to fight without powers. And that is super beaconing.
Okay, I buy the argument for Penny being the Beacon. When I was thinking over playbooks, I really wanted to go into a discussion about beacons and why I think they're cool, and why I really think Spider-Man Noir is secretly a burnt-out beacon who recaptures his lost sense of wonder by the end of the film. It's pretty clear he's an adult NPC, though. But, feel free to steal this idea for your own Masks game.
The power of the Rubik's Cube.
Oh my god, he's introduced by saying he's burning matches down so he can feel again, and then his sense of wonder and joy is restored using a Rubik's Cube. It was the best, and it was Nicolas Cage, and it was everything I wanted from this movie.
Yeah, it was my favorite Nicolas Cage role in many, many years.
Rich, what scenes in the movie could have easily been played with the paired game and how? What do you see in this movie that is ripped directly from a Masks game?
Okay, I feel really strongly about this. This series of scenes are such great examples of ways that you can creatively apply the Masks New Generation moves. All right, let's pick up in Miles' dorm room after his uncle just died in his arms. Miles is emotional, he's wrecked his room, and he sees a sketchbook with the artwork he worked on with his uncle. Obviously, he has the angry condition. He picks up the sketchbook and he throws it out of the window. He doesn't want to see it ever again. Then suddenly, the sketchbook flies back through the window at him. Peter B. Parker and the other spiders show up to talk to him. They tell him that they understand what he's going through, that they uniquely understand that loss. It is a perfect comfort or support move. And it was a hit. I guarantee it because I felt it. Now all Miles has to do is open up to them and he can clear that angry condition. But Miles doesn't. Miles doesn't want to let go of that anger. He doesn't want to open up. Now there's a pause. So now it's time for the GM to make a move. Out of nowhere, Miles' roomie shows up, and all the spiders have to hide on the ceiling. But they get a mixed success to unleash their power, so it's temporary. Gank sees them, and he passes out. Next, we see all the spider folks leaving, but Peter B. Parker sticks around. And in a very emotional scene, he tells Miles that Peter is going to be staying behind, and he needs the goober, that he is going to go off and fight against the Kingpin. Everybody else is going except for Miles. He uses his influence to tell Miles how the world works, telling Miles he isn't ready to face the Kingpin. Miles, he tries to fight it. He tries to reject Peter B. Parker's influence, but he fails. Now, he does get an XP, which in this game is called potential, but he can't use his powers to show Peter B. Parker he's ready. He has to mark a condition. So he marks hopeless. And then Peter B. Parker has the ability to shift his labels. And so Peter B. Parker tells him about the leap of faith, offering him a pathway to his future as a Spider-Man, because Peter B. Parker wants Miles to succeed. He is not there to make Miles feel bad. So he shifts Miles' superior up and his mundane down. And then he webs up Miles, he takes the goober, and he leaves him to go off and do what needs to be done to take down Kingpin.
That was such a great retelling of that scene using the mechanics.
Thank you.
I think it's an important scene to highlight for several reasons. One, as you said, Peter B. Parker wants to see Miles succeed. I think it's easy in games about teenage heroes to present adults who want to push down on the teens and have them fail at what the teens want to do and don't want to bring them up. But I think there's a lot we could take from making space for adults who are supportive.
Right, because that's what makes the adults sympathetic, what makes them heroes, right? The games of Masks where every adult hero is just a D-bag and a cape, I feel are pretty empty. And so I really love this moment of Peter B. Parker telling Miles what he doesn't want to hear. But based on everything that had happened up to that moment in the film, Peter B. Parker was absolutely right.
Yeah, and it's also important to make space to have these conversations about trauma. I mean, a lot of this movie is about trauma. And we think again of games about teenagers and about that coming of age and spending time in the character's emotional space where everything they knew minutes ago, hours ago is totally on turned up end. And this is Miles has come in. He has gained powers. He's seen his world Spider-Man die. His uncle turned out to be a villain. His uncle's now dead. I mean, you think of everything this child has gone through up until this point. And this is sort of where all those emotions sort of unwind.
It's rough. And I love that we can have those emotional moments and very distinctly apply moves to them in Masks: A New Generation. I think that's a brilliant part of the game.
Yeah, and it's making space to have those moves and say when your labels move, when you gain conditions that has like an immediate emotional effect. I mean, you're playing teenagers who have immediate emotional reactions to situations.
All right, Rach, what's a scene or some scenes in the movie that could have been played with masks?
This is going to be a little bit of an emotional shift, but when I watched the movie, one of the scenes that grabbed me the most was the raid on the Alchemix labs. That's when Peter B. Parker and Miles break in to steal a new goober. Trust me when I say that this term will make a lot more sense in the movie than when we say it right now. It's a fabulous action sequence, but it's also a great example of what Masks calls a chain reaction. Other PbtA games may call this a move snowball. To explain this concept quickly, the moves on both the GM and PC sides of the game are designed to feed off each other and help build a scene and a narrative together. There's a lot going on in this sequence. It lasts for several minutes. It's very frantic. It's very intense. And if we break down the scene action by action, we could have a whole podcast episode. So instead of me walking through this whole sequence, I would encourage listeners, if you have the opportunity, to rewatch it and consider when Miles's player is making moves and when the GM is reacting to those moves. If this was a game, the GM is definitely reacting to Miles's player, but none of those GM moves are shutting down the scene. I think it's a misconception that when a player gets a 6-, that's a fail and any attempts to go forward are stopped. Instead, when you see this action sequence, it's almost like you could hear a GM just to the side of the screen saying, okay, this is what happens. What do you do? One of the more striking examples, just to make space to focus on what could be a potential GM move, happens really early on. And that's interesting because it's not the GM move I would expect to feature so soon in a long action sequence. As Doc Ock is gloriously revealed, she captures Peter B. Parker, which is clearly the GM using the capture somebody move. It raises the stakes, but it doesn't do what we would expect a capture move to do, which is take the captured NPC away and end the scene. Instead, it's presented as a challenge, a barrier to the sequence going on right now, where Miles is trying to break into the computer and grab the files to stop the super collider. But it's not the end of the sequence.
Yeah, I love that capture someone move and how it tilts the scene rather than putting a full stop to it. Masks a New Generation, if you look through the moves, which is what happens on a 6-, the GM moves, there's never one that says the PC just fails. You inflict a condition, you can turn the move back on them, make them pay a price for victory. Victory? Yeah, you can actually succeed on a 6-, but there's a price for it. You can show the costs of collateral damage. You should really look at your assumptions as a GM and make sure that you leave some of those older styles of when a PC fails at a particular thing, then the character fails to do what they wanted. There are a lot of different ways that you can take your GM move, and make sure you look at that menu. Masks a New Generation has a fantastic and very rich menu. That is a cool series of sequences, Rach. I really appreciate you sharing that with us.
Thank you so much.
Well, there are tons of wonderful moments like this. This movie is a brilliant superhero story. We're going to bring this episode to a close here, but this has been a real treat, Rach. Thank you so much for breaking down some of your favorite moments with me and looking through the Masks lens at it.
Yeah, Rich, thanks for making movie night part of season 3. I love looking at movies and analyzing them. Like, all media is one of my favorite things to do. And to look at it in the context of role-playing games and some of our favorite role-playing games and the sense of you and masks. It's just been so much fun.
I got to tell you, Rach, I don't think I would have had the confidence to do this kind of show if I didn't have an expert like you by my side to help us slog through some of these harder parts of how do you make this do this? So this is great. Listeners, if you have feedback about this episode or you want to gab about the movie, hit us up on Twitter or leave a comment on the Gauntlet website for this episode. Thanks again, Rach.
Thank you again, Rich. And believe me, we love chatting about nerdy things, and this is going to be peak nerd, so look for us on Twitter.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Schelke. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at @+1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Hammer of Bill. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageauralhotbed.com. Hi listeners, I want to tell you about the newest issue of Codex, Codex Emerald. At 60 pages, Codex Emerald is the biggest issue of Codex yet. It also happens to be the best. Here's what you'll find inside. Emerald City Drama Club, a surreal and dreamy framework for Monster Hearts 2, about a group of kids putting on a production of The Wizard of Oz. Dark Designs in Verdigris, a game about exploring the Emerald City's seedy underbelly, a neighborhood called Verdigris, with mechanics inspired by World of Dungeons and traditional fantasy games. Dualhoven, a deluxe scenario for Dungeon World that explores a labyrinth of dwarven tunnels, stairs, homes, workshops, and crypts. It features a lot of really fantastic forward-looking tech for Dungeon World. Our miscellany, 3 dozen jeweled treasures, allegedly blessed or cursed, 9 original illustrations, and custom layouts by Jake Householder and Jesse Ross. To get Codex Emerald, just make a $5 or higher pledge on the Gauntlet Patreon by February 1st. That's at patreon.com/gauntlet. Thanks.